episode. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to episode number 12 of Virginia is for Conspiracy Lovers. We are sans Daniel again today because he's a slacker, but actually you guys know that his wife's got a broken foot and he's got two little boys and an infant. So we'll get him back at some point. With us today, I'm super excited about this. We've been teasing it for a couple episodes. But we've got one of my favorite researchers, Mr. Cort Lindahl. Welcome, Cort.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's a treat to be here. And I used to live in Virginia, so it's good to dig into some of my old stomping grounds and dig up some of the weird stuff.
Absolutely. So, guys, Cort is, if you don't know him, but if you're listening to us, you probably do. Cort is an author, an artist, a archaeologist. This guy has been featured on The Curse of Oak Island. He's been on their like supplemental show, Digging Deeper. He was the number one theory. He was voted the number one theory of what the heck is going on Oak Island, um, from all the guys who have come out, the separate individuals that they bring on to um, kind of put their theories forward. He was voted number one with his theory, and his theory is number one in my heart as far as that goes. And you guys know how I feel about Oak Island and how potentially interesting it could be there. Um, Cort has been looking into the concept of the Axis Mundi now for 17 years. His examination has led to many associations with lost treasure myths and legends. Stories like Oak Island, the Beale treasure, which we've teased just briefly on here, Rennes Chateau, and the Bruton Vault, which we've almost exhausted. May the and he believes, and this is why I love his information, is that these mysteries that I just listed have been used to relay information rather than a for sure 100% treasure location. Maybe some cool stuff buried, but the idea is that there's information and symbolism behind this stuff that is the kind of the real treasure. Cort's appeared on TV shows, Curse Oak Island, Drilling Down, Unexplained with William Shatner. Did you get to talk to Shatner?
No, I didn't get to meet him or anything.
Dang it.
They just tape you. That was about
Okay.
Yule treasure. So, no, I never got to meet him, and that was kind of bummed me out when that happened.
Yeah, you go on a Shat show, you think you're gonna get to meet the Shat. Bummer.
Exactly.
Um, again, author of 9 books related to the concept of the Axis Mundi and lost treasure myths and legends. Um, this, along with a thorough examination of the myths and legends of Mount Shasta, California, and that's one that I had to stop because I've listened to all of your Virginia, all of your Axis Mundi stuff, and I kept pushing the Mount Shasta stuff back and back and back and back because I'm like, no, not really my area. I want to burn through all this stuff. And then I got into it, and I had to stop myself because I was like, nope, I can't. I don't have any more room in my head right now for another mystery. But
That's
dude,
fun.
I can't tell you how excited I am to have you on here. We've talked before, but I got into Cort's work because I ran across it looking for Templar and Oak Island stuff, and I realized, oh my gosh, this guy is from my area. He went to a high school that was like kind of one of our rivals, the high school that I went to. I was in Williamsburg, he was in Tab, essentially separated, sort of, kind of by like that Blaine Pardo um Colonial Parkway, that we,
Okay.
we did a whole episode on the Parkway. So he was just basically on the other end of the Parkway. He's done archaeology in Colonial Williamsburg and on around William and Mary. His a lot of his theories deal with the same guys that I harp on and on about, your Thomas Jeffersons and Bacons and Randolphs. And anyway, really stoked. We're going to be talking some Williamsburg area stuff, teasing out a little bit of the Bruton Vault. And again, I'm going to shut my big
and
flapper, and
beyond.
I'm going to let you go, man. So give it to us.
All right. Well, the Bruton Vault story is always an interesting one. And it really, if you look at these treasure stories, or that in this case, it came to mean um, a stash of Sir Francis Bacon's papers had been hidden in Williamsburg. So well, a lot of these stories, there is a historical basis for, like Oak Island. It is possible there's a real treasure there, but people kind of expanded the stories, as in the case of the Bruton Vault, to kind of match their spiritual beliefs, or to relay some kind of hidden history information that otherwise may have been neglected. And a treasure story is a good way to do that because everybody's interested in a lost treasure, right?
Mm-hmm.
And over the years, the papers of Sir Francis Bacon have taken on all those overtones of, like, the Rosicrucian story of Christian Rosenkreuz, his remains being hidden along with a library of
Right.
important information and other riches, so to speak. So the Bruton Vault story is like that too, that states that the colonial rebel Nathaniel Bacon had brought Sir Francis Bacon, his cousin, distant cousins, papers to Jamestown.
Quick
And
question for you.
sure.
Just don't mean to derail you or anything, but I do hear that I do hear that that term distant relation when we're talking about Francis Bacon and Nathaniel Bacon, but
Mm-hmm.
it it just where that family separated was like Bacon's brother, right? Or no, Bacon's father's brother. So Bacon came from was it Nicholas Bacon? And then Nicholas had a brother,
Right.
and Nathaniel was in that line. So cousins, but if you were from Virginia, North Carolina, that wouldn't be a too far off cousin.
Right. Different generations of the same,
Right.
of
Because I
cousins.
hear a lot of people, poo poo that relationship and just and kind of give it like, yeah, he was a Bacon, but I mean, like, really, really like separated. But then you kind of look at Nathaniel Bacon and how he was educated and things like that. And it's like, well, I don't think that part of the family was that separated from,
No, no, and I'm sure
yeah,
they took kind of a familiar familial pride,
yeah,
to some
that's,
degree, in being related to Sir Francis Bacon, whether he was, the author of Shakespeare or not. He made a huge impact on history during his time. It
mhm,
was an important figure, mostly during the Elizabethan era, and kind of got persecuted more when the Stuarts took over, James the First. So that's when
right.
he kind of became persona non grata. And in fact, a lot of the inferences that he may have been the author of the Shakespeare or taken part in it with a group of people, some people theorize that he was actually being blamed for that. Like, he
Oh,
made a scapegoat because a lot of the subject matter in the plays wasn't
yeah,
complimentary towards royalty and things
yeah,
like that. And a lot of people think, the Earl of Oxford, De Vere, was actually behind it.
mhm.
And I believe it was a group of people, in my opinion.
That's my thing. That's been my field. There, you got your Oxfordians and your Stratfordians, and you've got um your Marlowe's. I
Right.
My daughter's name is Marlowe because when I got very first, originally I got very into this through the Shakespeare thing because my parents, or my mom, not my dad, certainly not my dad, but my mom has been dragging me to two Shakespeare plays a year since I was 9 years old at the
Right.
Virginia Shakespeare Festival. So I've seen right there in Phi Beta Kappa Hall the entire Shakespeare canon. And when I stumbled on that there was a question about who was the author, I was obsessed. And Marlowe
Sure.
was my introduction into that. But yeah, so there's all these people it could be, but then when you kind of there, at least tangentially, there is some connective tissue between all those guys and Bacon himself, and I think
Sure.
that's interesting that he's kind of like I'm really interested in the theory that he was kind of the arbiter of the you know this group of people who was maybe trying to put out one to rewrite the English language so there was a national language, and then two to kind of make these basically political commentary that could get you hung or your head cut
All
off.
right. And that's
um
interesting too, because the person who had done that earlier in history was Dante,
right,
who he kind of homogenized the Italian language and culture by
right,
having such a interesting and impactful piece of literature. So it makes sense that somebody like Sir Francis Bacon would realize that later, along with others who I think were involved, like Philip Sidney, and
mhm,
obviously Dr. John Dee is kind of in the middle of all of these people
yeah,
associated with them, and their names
yeah,
are mentioned in his diary and all of that kind of thing, his
right,
journals. So it makes sense that there was just a group of people that wished to, behind the scenes, it's no different than today, kind of manipulate or standardize
yeah,
cultural aspects of what's going on, because that's a lot
yeah,
more powerful than people realize. And we see that even in today's politics in a big way.
absolutely. Look at all the things that have been, I mean, not even taken aside politically one way or the other, but just look at all the things that have been normalized, say in the last 15-20 years, that were like unthinkable or just not on the radar like 15-20 years ago, and now
Sure.
it's just like, well,
Because of the
yeah,
internet. The
we're
internet.
yeah, and really, between Shakespeare and the first folio and the 1611 King James Bible, I really feel like that was the internet. That was like not the equivalent of um the same kind of effect, but it was kind of that mass informational download of that time. All the
Right.
There was, they looked at the English language as like this brutish, dumb language. I mean, to the fact that I, I mean, how many English kings spoke French? I mean, I know a lot of them had, came from French backgrounds or whatever, but I want to say I was reading somewhere that like I believe it was maybe Richard the Lionheart or maybe a different one who like only spent a total of a week. And it's one of the big
Oh,
like
he spent most of his time in France.
in France. Like he spent like a week in England and like he actually had crappy things to say about England for the most part. And
Right.
that's their like, that's the Robin Hood guy, you know what I mean? Like he's like a national hero. But
Was during that era, definitely.
yeah, and then all of a sudden you have this 1611 Bible, and you have the, I guess it's 1623 first folio, and then that kind of changes everything, and it's the kind of the building. They've already started the building of this big English empire, but it's really kind of, I think, a big part of solidifying
Sure.
that
And
empire. Yeah,
that, like the literature I point to, the
yeah,
Modest de Gala, the medieval novel supposedly written by Enrique of Castile, that Philip Sidney copied certain elements of that into his book Arcadia, that I point to. Is there's a story about a money pit in there that definitely talking about Oak Island, in my opinion. And then uh, Don Quixote, for example, is a parody of a Modest de Gala.
right,
There's this kind of literary DNA that you know, they valued. And I would point out that, royalty and nobility during these eras were very superstitious as well.
right,
They practiced things like bibliomancy, where they would randomly open a book. They'd form a question or query in their mind and randomly open the book, and then interpret whatever passage it was as if it was helping them understand what their problem was.
right.
Charles the First, for example, was known to, he consulted Virgil's Aeneid, during the English
Right.
Civil War, and it predicted his loss and
Demise.
demise. Right. So
Yeah.
that's just one example. And Virgil, during those, he affected all of that literature I just named to
Yeah.
the Roman poet. So they all had this value of him that was sort of like what Nostradamus would be viewed as too.
Do you think Wilton's Book of Emblems was that basically its purpose?
Withers' Book of Em.
Withers, that's what I meant.
Yeah, I
Withers Book
do.
of Emblems. You think it's
And
just a because it seems perfectly set up. It looks to me when I flip through it, it's like a deck of tarot cards.
right,
You
I
know what
don't
I mean?
know if it was meant to um
Be that
be applied strictly to the story in Williamsburg of the Burton Vault.
right.
Because I mean, Withers, he fits this pattern like Thomas Beale, the early denizen of York County. He was the sheriff of York County, and there's a plaque on one of the pews at the Bruton Parish Church with
Yep.
his name on it, that he was a Cavalier bodyguard of Charles I. And so he came to Virginia too. And George Wither, who compiled the Withers Book of Emblems, was also a Cavalier bodyguard. And uh, if you look at the dedicatees of that book, one of them is the nephew of Philip Sidney, Philip Herbert. And these things may have meanings or applications or allegories or even coded information in there that we don't understand now, that
Yeah.
applies to some of these Rosicrucian concepts and things like Bacon's vault. We'll swing back around to that eventually.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm gonna derail you. You gotta tell me
Okay.
to shut up every now and again.
That it's interesting if you really look at it. You see that the Beale treasure and the story of the Burton vault have a lot of crossovers, and
Yeah.
even to the point. Well, one of the most weird and interesting things I found by looking at Wither's Book of Emblems was that one of his direct descendants, Robert Enoch Withers, was the last person to view the Civil War gold on the trains in Danville, Virginia. And he wrote about this in his autobiography.
I didn't know that.
And on top of that, Robert Enoch Withers was the head of the Masonic Knights Templar of all the United States after the Civil War.
Really?
So that's a really interesting and tantalizing clue. In addition to that, his mother was from the Alexander family of the Baron of Nova Scotia.
Right.
So I keep finding all these weird little connections from one of these mysteries to the next. And like I said, they're all seemingly based on a real treasure story, just like Ron Le Chateau in France. There is a real treasure story there, but you can see how Merovingian interest may have come in there and told the story in such a manner that you learn who they are now. A lot of
Yeah.
people have forgotten that, what it really means, that they
Right.
should have been the true rulers of France and things like that. So these series of fallen kings like the Stuart family in England and the Merovingians kind of affected this Rosicrucian overtones into some of these stories, I believe. And so the Burton Vault is no different. There's a true story that I discerned what happened. And then later you had this kind of theosophical interests come in, Marie Bauer Hall and others, and
Yeah.
kind of teach you about their beliefs using this story.
The same way that, these Merovingian bloodlines possibly were using these real treasures to kind of, imbuing them with their story. And
Exactly.
that could have been because they believe that they were part of the story, or simply just to attach themselves and give their kind of bloodline more credit to. I mean, their whole point was we have the divine right of kings. Do you think that the Christ bloodline of the Merovingians is part of their lore, or do you think that that was something added by like 20th century? Like,
I
how
think it was
far does
added.
them?
It was sooner than that. It was
Okay.
that belief probably started, to gain traction in the 17th century,
Okay,
that they
so
were actually physically related to Christ, because that probably first started out, as the story goes, that the Arcadians from ancient Greece became Trojan colonists. So they
I don't
became
know
the
this part.
Trojans as well. And then they migrated across the Black Sea and up the rivers, the Danube River and the Rhine and things, to that northern France and southern Germany region, where
Right.
they believe the Arcadians originated from the tribe of Benjamin, one of the lost tribes of Israel. So the first belief was that they, were related to that, even though they were pagans.
Wow.
The Merovingians at first were pagans. They weren't turned Christian until the Byzantines kind of converted them, the Romans, and they intermarried with some Roman nobility. I document all this book in my book, The New Jerusalem of Ravenna, and
Wow.
how the Merovingians intermarried with, even early on, the Byzantine royalty. It wasn't just later, during Charlemagne or whatever. It was started very early, like in the third century.
So that whole thing that spawned the Da Vinci codes and the holy blood, holy grail. I mean, that is quite possibly a Greco-Roman influence
There is
from
that
the point.
influence there, yeah, definitely, if you really
That's
look
interesting.
into it. And a
That's
lot of people
interesting.
deny that, but I found that, that's one reason it became so interesting, is because then those same people became European nobility during the Merovingian age, after they converted to Christianity, and that gave us Charlemagne, and of course a
Right.
whole nother sect of them that resented the fact that the true person who deserved to be king was not the one who was. So that created, immediately when you see a fallen king or displaced regime, a secret society springs up in order to
Pops up.
try to reestablish that. And they have a lot of huge advantages if they're funded correctly, because they run themselves like a state with no
Yeah.
physical domain that they have to maintain as well. So
Yeah.
they can
It's the deep
develop,
state.
yeah, an intelligence service kind of thing.
Yeah.
You could say,
Propaganda arm.
or
I
the
mean, this,
opposition of the deep state as well, is the same kind of concept too. So,
yeah.
and
Well, dude, I,
go ahead.
let me direct you back to where you had started because I have derailed you
That's
to
okay.
we're so like, and that's my fault completely.
That's all
Um,
right.
get back to I know you had like uh path of thought that was kind of Williamsburg related, and dude, I could pick your brain about these kind of bloodline and especially the Greek influence of Arcadia, but you'll get to that stuff as it goes. It's kind of
All right. I would say, before we move away
foundational.
from that, is when
Yep.
that comes to America or the United States, the treasure is what we are.
That's kind of how I always saw it.
It's the Declaration of Independence, for example.
Do
These
you think?
concepts are stressed as if they're a treasure by people like Thomas Jefferson. And I
Yeah.
believe he knew about the Bruton Vault, and he knew the true story of what it really represented, which is different than the version presented to us by Marie Bauer Hall, or
Right.
the notion that Sir Francis Bacon's papers are involved just because his cousin and his other cousin, let's not forget the other
Yeah.
Nathaniel Bacon, the elder,
The
as
elder.
well.
Yeah.
They kind of opposed each other
Yeah.
in their ways of thought. One was a royalist who supported the status quo in Virginia of all the earlier landowners controlling everything, and selling head rights to come to the colony if they could have the land the person was promised. So
Right.
they became incredibly powerful, while the newbies, like Nathaniel Bacon, who didn't come until, I think, the 1671, something like
So,
that.
yeah. That's the one thing that's always kind of blown me away about him is that he didn't cruise over until 1671, and by
76. When the,
1676,
yeah. 100
He'd
years
taken
before the revolution. So
exactly 100 years before the revolution. I I always connect everything back to the Templars, but I always find it very interesting that, this kind of Bacon led company um, comes over here in 1607, exactly 300 years after these Templars are outlawed, and then a Bacon, you know, starts like this revolution, this
right,
localized revolution exactly 100 years before we do it, we get it done.
right.
Um,
So they created a mystery out of that. I think just because the Bacon name is involved.
yeah,
That's my conclusion. And what kind of tipped me off to that was, so just to make it clear, Nathaniel Bacon came. He kind of fomented a revolution against the landed gentry that their families had been there longer. That a lot of those families still went on later to become the
yeah.
first families of Virginia, all of those names. So he rebelled against them and was very popular and had a lot of followers, and they actually took over most of the colony for a good period of time before he fell ill and died unexpectedly.
Yeah.
So one of the greatest mysteries in Virginia history is, where are the remains of Nathaniel Bacon? And here we have those Rosicrucian overtones of missing remains coming back, along with somebody else, I believing, attaching the notion that he also had the papers of his famous cousin, Sir Francis. So I think,
Almost to imbue that mystery with even more weight,
right. So I can see
right?
people like, I was discussing, who would want to teach you more about their point of view, may have just attached that idea to a story that I'll reveal here in a second. That to me was kind of exposed when I was looking at Thomas Jefferson valued Nathaniel Bacon because of his declaration, that he used as one of his inspirations for the Declaration of Independence, that he was friends with James Nicholson, the man who the headstone in the Bruton Parish churchyard is kind of laid out like a page from the first folio, and his date of death is the birthday of Sir Francis Bacon. And other things.
Also,
Go ahead.
that Francis Nicholson headstone, it is a Francis Nicholson headstone, right?
I think his name is James. I'm sorry.
James Nicholson. That's the yeah.
I
That
might be
is the
wrong.
no. That's the
Well,
son or
Francis
grandson,
Nicholson was the former
yeah,
governor. And
right?
I looked and I couldn't find any relation in the genealogy between the two,
To
but
James Nicholson,
yeah, they may be related.
really?
Yeah,
Oh,
and
I thought I read somewhere they were, but
that's
um,
fine. I wouldn't have any
no,
trouble
no, no,
believing
no.
that.
You're probably right. But no, just regardless of who it is, that tombstone, and I think people, if they don't live around colonial era cemeteries and things like that, they don't realize
Right.
that a lot of these were above ground vaults. So
Uh-huh.
big, stone squares with a massive, almost like what you would see in the cathedrals in,
The tomb.
Germany and
Right.
France. Yeah, it's a tomb with a big stone slab over top of it, not a tombstone sticking up out of the
Right.
ground. And so
Even
there's a
though, yeah, they have some of
they
those.
have those too, yeah.
Yeah,
But
that
large
tombstone is interesting.
surface area
Yeah.
to inscribe. And particularly what's interesting about that tombstone and the whole connection to Shakespeare and the connection to Williamsburg and Shakespeare is that I read somewhere that somebody looked through as many tombstones in America, like on that like gravefinder.com, to see if they could find any epitaph that started with Dear Reader.
Right. That's
And to
another thing
my
that connects it to kind of the
yeah,
that
to
era.
my
Yeah.
knowledge, he still was looking and had looked at tens of thousands and couldn't find anything from that era that started off the epitaph on the Nicholson tombstone, or slab there starts off Dear Reader,
Right.
which is the way that the first folio of Shakespeare, the intro by Ben Jonson
And
starts
other,
off
that's not uncommon in
right,
other pieces of literature or writing
right,
either, but it
but
definitely,
it definitely seems like a nod to
yeah.
that, and
And then
not
not
the
to mention the date of death is Sir Francis Bacon's birthday. And I really think, obviously, that tombstone is the entire origin of the whole Bruton Vault story of people just
wow,
trying to figure out. I mean, even in 1773, which is when he died, and is the date on the tombstone, that Sir Francis Bacon was still a subject of mystery and intrigue. I think people had already figured out there were ciphers and codes in the first folio, which we can talk about. I think other people put them in there, like the people the book was dedicated to, for instance, were the
yeah,
nephews of Philip Sidney. So that's a whole nother story. But I think the tombstone created the whole myth of why people later, like Marie Bauer Hall or the enigmatic Mr. Cunningham, who kind of
yeah,
influenced her, in that whole telling her the whole story. And
yeah,
I think he was related to Jacobite interests later, and that's why he might have had access to the truth of the story. But what I found out was, through Thomas Jefferson's admiration of, he was good friends with James Nicholson.
yeah,
There's even records of him owing James Nicholson money for plants that were planted at Monticello and other things, but he did pay him a large amount of money the year before he died. So, possibly Freemasons in Williamsburg at the time saw this as a way to kind of teach people their values, and obviously the legacy of Nathaniel Bacon. There's a certain class of people that would wish to bury that and not let people know about it, that he was a hero to some people and a villain to others. And he did have
right,
a lot of devout followers, and we know his remains are missing and have never been found. So when you think about that era of society, if his remains would have been found, they would have drawn and quartered them and hung them up and
right,
disrespected them the same way they did Blackbeard's crew when they hung them at the Williamsburg gallows. I worked on that project when I was an
yeah.
archaeologist in Williamsburg when
Oh, I did a whole episode on that. I got a couple questions for you
we
as
dug
far as
up
that goes.
gallows
But
and
that
figured it out.
let's.
I was involved in helping to figure out what they were too, because we weren't sure what it was
Oh
when we first
wow,
found it. So that was one of the bigger feathers in my cap, I guess, as an
that's
archaeologist.
so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard you talk about I'll just throw it in there since we cruised past it real quick, but um the uh the skull story,
Right. Of
the punch bowl,
Blackbeard
yeah,
himself. Yeah.
Blackbeard's skull. I did an entire part one on Blackbeard's skull, just kind of laying out like the accounts of it and things like that, and I connect it very much to Freemasonic lore.
Yeah, it's like a memento mori as well, which is a
Yeah,
lot of people don't understand, was very popular
it
during
was.
that
And
era.
the Masons, I mean, there are, I don't care what any Mason tells you, there is at the 32nd degree, you absolutely drink from a skull. I've done talks and
Right. Maybe that's connected to the punch bowl. And let's tell people what that is first.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Like when they finally captured Blackbeard,
Hmm.
as the story goes, he was beheaded on the spot. And then his head was hung on stuck on a pike in the Hampton Harbor. And it was left there for a while. Of course, till there was no flesh left on it. It was just a skull. And then that was taken and fashioned into the base of a silver punch bowl, which, there's a lot of pretty reliable sources that say this was
Yeah.
true. I mean, you could see how something like that would be misinterpreted as being fake or a comic book, you know.
Yeah. There's a lot of people that poo poo it, but like the amount of accounts of people having like contemporary accounts of people seeing it.
Right, all the
And
way until the 1920s, even. So
right.
you got to at least give that something that people saw it as late as
Well,
then.
my kind of, I'm leaning towards, and I'm finding interesting stuff, and it could be just circumstantial stuff, but it possibly having come into the hands of uh one, the Masons, or the or possibly Phi Beta Kappa, um at back then, because they were all meeting in the Apollo room of the Raleigh Tavern.
And
It
that's
was,
where so a lot of the accounts say it was seen even
yeah.
back before the 1920s.
So let me tell you one thing that's interesting that I found, and this is going to be revealed in my part 2 of Blackbeard's skull. But what I found that's really interesting is there's a point in Phi Beta Kappa, because they were a lot more secretive. They were, when they first started, they were like the Flat Hat or the Seven Society. They were, yes, they a philosophical,
Sure.
kind of literary society, but they had some pretty staunch oaths and hand grips and stuff. I mean, I can't remember the handful of guys that started Phi Beta Kappa. They were also Masons as well, and then they actually had people who didn't go to the college who were also Masons as well. So I'll just burn through this real quick because you might find it interesting. So, um, there's a point around the revolution where Phi Beta Kappa just kind of goes dark, and there's a guy named Land Cabell. Okay, the Cabell family. One of the Cabells was going Cabl, Cabal. I don't know how they pronounce it. He was going to William and Mary, and at some point he got entrusted with all the jewels and documents of Phi Beta Kappa. Okay, and nobody realized it for like 50 years. And then when Phi Beta Kappa started getting going again, um, he donated the stuff back to he like kept it for safekeeping during the revolution.
Right.
And it
And that
wasn't in
origins of Phi Beta Kappa are at William and Mary for
1776.
right. There you go.
And yep, their origins are at William and Mary in the Apollo room of the Raleigh Tavern, where the Blackbeard punch bowl skull was seen multiple times. They drink from a skull in these rituals and rites. And what I find really interesting though is, the Blackbeard uh flag, right? That
Mm-hmm.
everybody calls the Blackbeard flag. Well, it's not the Blackbeard flag, most likely, because every account of where they of anybody who encountered Blackbeard never described it as that. The one place that flag is described like that is a different pirate. But the first time that flag is described is by a bonesman from Yale. Okay. He writes a book about treasure. Okay. And he describes Blackbeard's flag as the flag with the horned skeleton holding a dart with 3 drops of blood and an hourglass or a goblet, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he was a bonesman at Yale. He was a member of Skull and Bones. Well, Phi Beta Kappa, the Skull and Bones were created solely because Russell and Taft. Russell was a member of Phi Beta Kappa, and around the 1830s, kind of after that whole, the Masons are killing people for telling secrets, and everybody hated the Masons. Everybody, all these like secret societies and stuff started going, all right, we're not going to be secret anymore. And Phi Beta Kappa was staunchly like a secret society until that point. And then they voted at Yale to change it into just a regular kind of academic achievement society. And Russell was pissed because he was a member of this important secret society, and him and Taft formed the Skull and Bones. Well,
Interesting.
if you look, I find the connection between Skull and Bones and Phi Beta Kappa interesting. The fact that the skull was seen in the Phi Beta Kappa meeting room, and that if you flip the Phi Beta Kappa key
Mm-hmm.
upside down, put Phi Beta Kappa and the Blackbeard's flag side by side, and you've got the 3 stars up in the top left that match the 3 dots of blood down in the bottom right. Right.
Right.
You've got. I'm going to do a whole thing on it, but it's almost an inverse in the fact that a guy from Skull and Bones who would have been acutely aware of that transition from Phi Beta Kappa into Skull and Bones, and then he's writing a book about treasure and about
Right.
Blackbeard, and he's the only one who ever described Blackbeard's flag as that flag, and it's almost like a middle finger to Phi Beta Kappa because it's such a similar, including the heart. I mean, the heart sits right where the bee is, and the bee's got like the humps, like it's pretty. It's a might be complete horseshit, but the way I'm looking at it is interesting, and I keep
Well, it's interesting
uncovering.
too because Blackbeard was an avowed Jacobite,
Mm-hmm.
and so that means he was a supporter of the fallen kings, the
Yep.
Stuart fallen kings, and maybe even some of the money or booty, if you will, that he captured what was going towards the Jacobite cause. And, the era in which he was operating and everything was close to the 1715 Jacobite rebellion in
Yeah.
Scotland, which
I mean,
attempted,
1717 is when they cut off his head.
yeah.
I mean,
So there you
everything
go.
was happening in Williamsburg right at that time, man. I mean, you had, I mean, it wasn't that long before Bacon's or after Bacon's rebellion. You're talking
Yeah,
1676,
not
and
too
then
long. Yeah. 20,
yeah, I mean, in the grand
30
scheme
years.
of
Yeah.
things, 30, 40 years. And then you've got Blackbeard. You've got me and you talked just privately on the phone about my theory on, and we've done an episode on it so people know the Knights of the Golden Horseshoe and how that thing really seems like a big Masonic, possibly the first big
Sure.
Masonic
And
meeting and
that's
ritual in
right. And they
the
like I
States.
think too, in addition to what you're saying, they're the ones who uh, know the real story of Nathaniel Bacon.
Right.
You won't see, I think, Freemasons. I'd be surprised if they were believing the kind of more
Yeah.
new age version of that, because my conclusions are that the quote treasure in the Bruton Parish Church is the remains of Nathaniel Bacon
I
that
think
was
it's important to
secretly buried there because they didn't want
it
his
to be
remains
desecrated.
displayed or disrespected. So they had to keep it secret, even for years later.
And I
You
think
know,
some people might be wondering why they would have gone to such lengths to hide and create, this secret behind where they buried him. But one, they would have disrespected it, hung it up, just like they did with Blackbeard. They hung
Blackbeard's
his
true.
head from a pole.
Exactly.
But also, I mean, for the small group and the small revolution that Nathaniel Bacon was the head of, I mean, he was their George Washington. I mean, he
Yes.
was the guy on the front lines writing the scathing declarations and statements to the government and kind of leading the charge. And so I think history has kind of forgotten, the victor writes the
And
history there.
that's why the story is there.
Yeah.
I think if you just looked at the headstone and tried to start surmising away why this is there and ignore Marie Bauer Hall and her whole assumptions and things, I mean, let's face it, if you open her book to a random page, it's almost unintelligible to somebody who
Yeah.
hasn't been initiated into whatever way
Yeah.
she's channeling it, or, and not to disrespect her or theosophy in general. It's a good thing,
Right.
people value it. It's kind of like a religion and faith to them. So I'm not trying to debase that or anything, but if you just look at the historical facts of what's
Yeah.
going on and the degree to people, even like 100 years later in 1773, James Nicholson and Thomas Jefferson and all the other initiates and students and Freemasons at William and Mary would have realized, let's keep his legacy alive this way
Yeah.
by making a kind of Rosicrucian mystery involving missing remains that I don't know if at that time they had attached any papers to it or anything that
Right.
else that are included in the story of Christian Rosenkreuz, but I think that's what was going on. And that later, when other people with their more modern views of such things got a hold of the story, it took on all these new age overtones that people more to the point where it's become that's the way the story is actually told today. No one considers that it could even be
Yeah.
something else, but uh, I think it honestly does just represent the fact that Nathaniel Bacon is secretly entombed or buried in the Bruton Parish
Well,
churchyard.
and I do think to a certain degree now, maybe this is just my opinion, but yeah, maybe the lost works of Shakespeare are not buried underneath the church, you know.
Right.
But I do think the connection with his family member, it being Bacon kind of not necessarily being a revolutionary, but
The
definitely,
mystique that's applied, that
yeah,
other people
to a
that's
certain degree, he was a contrarian, and his whole New Atlantis and what America turned into being basically what's described, including things that he, almost kind of predicted a couple hundred years
sure.
beforehand. Um, but I forgot where I was going with this, but I do still think that um it it is a veneration of both Nathaniel Bacon, but
Right.
possibly that family total, because we know that not only did Jefferson um um think fondly of Nathaniel Bacon, but he also thought fondly of, I mean,
Oh, Sir
George
Francis
Wythe.
Bacon. Yeah.
Yeah, George Wythe,
Well, he had a painting of Sir Francis Bacon. It was known to be one of his top five favorite
yep,
people. And then even later at Monticello, he employed two members of the
yep,
Bacon family as personally helping him run Monticello. And
right,
what's interesting too is if, Miss Hall thought that the papers were buried beneath the bell tower first of the old church in Jamestown,
right.
and then at the Bruton Parish Church in Williamsburg. Now, you know this when you go into the bell tower of the Bruton Parish Church today, what do you see there? The
Bacon.
tombstone, the tombstone of the elder Nathaniel Bacon, who,
Yep.
a member of the House of Burgesses and an important figure during his life, in the development of Virginia and
Yeah.
and all the politics that were involved. So that's how he came to be kind of opposing his family relation. He was also a distant cousin of Sir Francis Bacon as well,
Right.
to Nathaniel
Now,
Bacon. So there, that's part of the story as well. But I do
now
think
that
that they
oh,
were
go ahead.
just using, in my opinion,
Yeah.
the imagery of Sir Francis Bacon to kind of draw you into what does this headstone really mean, and that to me it meant Nathaniel Bacon and not his more famous, cousin Sir
Yeah.
Francis. So
Um, so where do you want to go? You just keep going. Where are we going next, man? Because I know that you can tie this into like that kind of that base of your research, which is your, that your alignments, the idea of Arcadia, and
right,
I
and
know
that
we,
is displayed in Williamsburg for sure.
yeah,
And we know, there's lots of reasons that I can cite that I will here that connect, everything to even the book Arcadia by Philip Sidney. And there,
right,
as I keep mentioning, there's a passage in the book where the hero sends somebody to dig up a treasure that's stashed in a pit that had already been dug up. And this individual digs down and finds parchments at the bottom and what he describes as a stone like that atop a tomb. And then he moves that, and there's more parchments and poetry beneath that. So here we go. Here's another kind of Enochian
right.
inference that is very popular with Freemasons, especially in the 18th and 19th century. That's not so much there anymore, from
It's
what I've
coming
read.
back in that order.
Yeah, and
There's a
Oak Island
revival of
also.
that.
Yeah, Oak Island also refers to that with the 9 layers of logs. It's like the
Yep.
9 layers of the Enochian chamber that was built. So in Williamsburg, we have the powder magazine. It's a unique octagonal structure, and I've identified several of these. Now, this is not every octagonal structure in the world, does not represent what I'm talking about, but they were often used to denote a prime meridian or a place where you could locate this. It's like you're on the map now. This is a
Right.
very important symbolic thing, like the Greenwich Meridian in England or the Paris Meridian in France. That here in the new colony in Williamsburg, that uh, Governor Spotswood was responsible for this, though I'm sure it wasn't his idea
Right.
completely. That they built this octagonal structure. And in Philip Sidney's book Arcadia, it's also mentioned these star-shaped lodges that are valued in this manner. So,
Right.
and when I looked into the history of Philip Sidney in real life, he had a value of such things, and even visited people in Europe that had star-shaped homes that believed this, that, they could, people were becoming more and more adept at plotting their location on the globe. So that's
Right.
what the Powder Magazine in Williamsburg really means. And these are de facto astronomical observatories
Right.
that are based on the Tower of the Winds of Athens, mostly was the most influential one. And that even went on to influence Constantine, who obviously knew about this concept, and later people. And then even to where it became kind of neglected or forgotten in the art of cartography or map making, that later English gentry who wanted to create their own little Arcadia on their estates would have reproductions of the Tower of the Winds also.
Right.
So it's no surprise that later the Powder Magazine was built in Williamsburg in that tradition. And that, I think, was kind of a secret that people, Thomas Jefferson, for instance, learned about this likely when he was a
Yeah.
student at William and Mary, that it was taught
The
to him
adepts.
in
Yeah.
this esoteric manner,
And
because
that's kind of my whole theory with Williamsburg, and really William and Mary in particular, is that the normal person looks at it like we all do, and they see an octagonal building that's, so far from this building, or you've got this statue in this particular place or what, and it just looks like beautiful landscaping. But to the people who are what they would call themselves adepts of these mysteries and these secrets, they do it. It's almost like old graffiti. It has a purpose, but then at the same time, it's leaving their mark, and it's leaving a mark. I mean, the entire all of these organizations, Masons and secret societies, and these secret bloodlines and stuff, their their entire structure is built in a way that it doesn't matter if they die, because they've passed whatever the precepts and the concepts of their
yeah,
order down, to where they know that it could get lost in one area, that those concepts could get lost in one area for 150 years. But if there's some kind of unmovable structure or something there, that an adept 150 years later can come through and go, oh, I know what that is.
all right, that goes
And if
back to
that's
the
here,
whole
I could look.
Enochian concept of the pillars of Boaz and Yakin,
Yeah.
where the precepts or concepts of science and mathematics were recorded on something that supposedly couldn't be destroyed. So
Right.
yeah, if you're initiated into what these things might actually represent, then you'll know what that is. And in
And
this
you'll add
case,
to it.
yeah, in
And
this
you'll
case,
add
it's
to
just
it.
a practical thing too. It marks a prime meridian.
Right.
That's the longitude that was used to denote Williamsburg, more than likely, and that people might like one of the facets of the octagon points to right where I think Nathaniel Bacon's grave is, in the Bruton Parish churchyard. And there
I,
used to be a stained glass rendering of Nathaniel Bacon in the Powder magazine that
right. I was going to ask you about that earlier, and I forgot.
they recently moved that to Bacon's castle instead.
Which doesn't make
Doesn't
any
make any
sense.
sense, yeah, because
No.
it wasn't even his property or home.
No, he just bummed it
Yeah,
to
I
like
think maybe
headquarter.
they're trying to cover up
What?
what
Yeah.
really went on. I don't know,
Um,
but
without
doesn't make any
you,
sense.
giving it away. So you think that in the churchyard there's possibly a tomb or an area of the churchyard where the remains are, which would make total sense. They
Yeah,
could,
it could be in one of the tombs that are there,
yeah,
you
because
know, that,
I
that you'll
have,
see, but it could be unmarked as well.
because yeah, so there is something interesting, and I'm sure you don't want to share the location, but I'll share my
Oh, I
interesting
would
location.
tell you if I had a little map of the churchyard,
Yeah.
it's even near one that particular tombstone that resembles the one in Wither's Book of Emblems.
Oh, okay. So I've got this one that is exactly 1,611 feet from the front door of the Wren building.
Sure.
That is obnoxiously impossible to see. You can't get to it. Now with the restrictions of walking in the churchyard, you can only go through with a eh, you
One
can
of the
only go
guys.
through with a tour, and they don't go back to that section. So if you're standing on Duke of Gloucester Street, like kind of facing the churchyard wall, it's
Mm-hmm.
in the top, it's in the upper left back end of the churchyard, and it's an old tomb, and it's hard to find the inscription on. There's three there, and they only list in the, the book that Bruton Chapel has of
Yes.
all the like tombs and whatnot. They only list two of those three. It's exactly 1,611 feet from the front door of the Wren building. There's
Mm-hmm.
a, I can't remember, but I definitely, after listening to you, I measured it from the center of the powder magazine, and it felt like a significant number there. But then also from the front door of George Wyth's house, it's like exactly 333 feet. And so it kind of had this kind of triangulation that was interesting. I don't know if it's anything there, but what's interesting is you can go into the churchyard, you can walk around the area. They've got some parts of it cordoned off, but you can see some of these really old tombs because they were the closest to the church anyway. You can
Mm-hmm.
see some of these old tombs, but you can't get back to that corner. And they've got a 6 foot high brick wall around that corner. The rear of the property is flanked by the George Wythe property, and you can't get that far back. And then the property on the other side of the wall there is a privately owned residence, one of the few on Duke of Gloucester Street.
There's some of the
And
offices for the church there too.
yeah,
And
and
you
you just
notice
can't
they
get.
have now an octagonal, what looks like a
Oh
window
yeah, they
or
do.
something
That
that's part of the church holdings.
that's really interesting too. These in Colonial Williamsburg and William and Mary, and this goes to my theory that um, over the years, even right up to present day, again, these adepts um, see these signs that are there, learn the history, know the story, and continue to uh, provide and push different things to be placed in different places, not for a
Sure.
nefarious purpose,
Yeah, that's
but
entirely possible. Definitely
uh,
that I've seen that in a lot of these places that are like
yeah.
this. That
Well,
they
you've got octagonal structures. It's become, the octagon has become like a symbol to a certain degree of Colonial Williamsburg. Another thing that's interesting is that the Bruton Chapel, um, the Bruton Chapel window has become this massive symbol at William and Mary. So you know the big gigantic circular window.
uh-huh.
I've got a friend of mine, Dan Duke, who has tied it to the Knights of the Golden Circle, the template of the Knights of the Golden Circle. It's when you overlay that template, that treasure template of the Knights of the Golden Circle onto the circular window of Bruton Chapel, Bruton Parish. It lines up exactly the same with the turkey tracks and whatnot. I had him on here. It was pretty incredible. But what I find really interesting is when they built the new library at William and Mary, they made a massive reproduction of that window and put it right in the front of the library. And I was like, well, that's kind of cool. But I mean, any circular window would do if that's all you were going for. But they really have like adopted this symbol. Then I looked up photographs of the because I was wondering what was behind that window, because it's in an upper floor of the that you can't get to in the library there. Um, so I kind of wanted to see what the inside of that room looked like, and it's a modern construction. Well, not only is that massive window there, but um, embossed in the backs of it's a boardroom, and embossed in the backs of every chair around the board table is the Bruton Chapel window. It's that exact same, and it's like, why? It's just a window. Like, it's a
Well,
pretty
it that
awesome window, but
all the students used to attend there obviously could
right,
be. It is
yeah,
part of the heritage of the college and
for
everything.
sure,
It's kind of part of this linear alignment between the Wren building and the Colonial Capitol building,
for
as
sure,
is the Powder magazine,
for sure,
which is, I believe, inspired the National Mall later to some degree
yeah,
as being a capital arranged that way. That was designed by Francis Nicholson,
yeah,
originally. So, there it could be that kind of value of the, I'm just
yeah,
grasping for a practical reason that they would value that. It
yeah,
could be as simple as that. I mean, how many presidents attended the Bruton Parish Church?
yeah.
Five,
Well,
I
that's again why my mind immediately goes to, well, it means something. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
because how many other things are there, like, in that town that could be to just take a simple window or the simple shape of the octagonal structure and then
Oh
to
yeah,
repeat it so many times. um I'm sure there are examples where it is just a guy who's like, hey, let's make this like the window, let's make this
sure.
like the
Every,
powder magazine. But I do find when it keeps happening to be like, man, somebody wants to keep that
well,
symbol
that speaks
going,
to
keep it
kind of some
around.
of the people that you can tell were hip to all of this.
Yeah.
Among them the Rockefellers,
Mm.
your J.P. Morgans, your
Carnegie's.
William Randolph Hearst, who right here in Chico where I live, the Hearst family shipped over a Cistercian chapter house from the 12th century,
Really?
all of the stones, and it's just
Rebuilt
recently
it?
been rebuilt near Chico here where I live in California.
Whoa.
And he did this in the 1930s,
And
and the
they
stones
still had to
just
get
sat
it built
there.
up.
And then eventually the Rockefellers today helped to
The
fund.
Rockefellers did it.
Yeah, and it's a
Of
Cistercian
course they did.
monastery, that's at a
Yeah.
Cistercian monastery named New Clairvaux after the Clairvaux
Bernard of
monastery.
Clairvaux.
Right, right. So it's you can go there and see, 12th century masons marks on the stones, and
Wow.
pretty cool. So, that's the kind of thing they do. William Randolph Hearst also built, Hearst Castle, as it's known as, and
Yeah.
the Casa Grande, the biggest building there, is a copy of the cathedral in Ronde, Spain. And I didn't even know that, but I had found all this weird stuff in Ronde, Spain, associated with the Great Cyclic Cross of Vendée.
Yeah.
That he seemed to be aware of things like this. And not only him, it's interesting, as part of the Oak Island story, there's this man named Francis Bannerman who built a reproduction of a Scottish castle on an island in the Hudson River.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
and the
The Bannerman
Newport
Castle.
Tower points
Yep.
to it,
Yep.
and Poplar Forest of Thomas Jefferson points to it, the octagon. I meant to squeeze in when we were talking about the Powder magazine that, Jefferson was influenced by that in his octagonal designs of
Oh, yeah.
Monticello, and then his country estate, Poplar Forest, which is kind of a copy of the Dome of the Rock, if you really,
Oh, wow.
break that down, that it was. So that points to Bannerman's Island. So I see this kind of a cadre of wealthy people in the early 19th century that were hip to all of this and almost played it like a game, where
Yeah.
they would build a structure of their own that pointed to the Powder magazine. For example, I mentioned the Casa Grande at Hearst Castle, and that if you draw an arc on the globe that matches the orientation of that, it points to the Powder magazine in Williamsburg. Now, if you go to the
I
border,
find that so funny that that the Rockefellers, again, the Rockefellers are responsible for the revitalization of Williamsburg and William and Mary, and that they went you know, to the opposite coast to help finish this Cistercian chapter house.
No, that was the Hearst family that
Oh,
did.
I thought you said the Rockefellers
I know,
helped
no,
finally
no,
build it.
the
Okay.
Hearst
Because
family that
that I was
did
like, oh
that.
God, there it is.
But they were all associated. Like a lot of them were on
Yeah,
the
for sure.
board of the Metropolitan Museum in New York City. I found that, a lot of them associated with each other there.
Have
And
you found any connection with the Rockefellers to Oak Island?
no, that I
Me
could,
either.
yeah,
I
I
can't
wouldn't say
believe I can't find it, but
there's
I just
connections to lots of royalty there, and the
yeah.
inference that
Oh yeah.
the Stewart family was involved in that, beginning even as far back as James the First, that they could
Right.
have had some interest there.
Well,
Uh,
wasn't it like and I'm correct me if I'm wrong, but I read it somewhere and for the life of me I can't find the exact expedition, but like after the third supply mission or maybe like in the 1620s, like didn't the English cruise up there and take it back? Like it was like
what the region
Nova
of Nova
Scotia.
Scotia? Well, yeah,
Yeah.
that
It was like early.
makes it very complex, and it leads to a lot of inferences of either French or English involvement. And then if you look at the Stuarts and the Jacobites, that involved French people and English
Yeah.
people right there working together anyway. So yeah,
Yeah.
it changed hands many times from French back to English, and even periods when it was supposed to be English, the French would be like, we're not leaving anyway, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
actually, the English people and French people who live there learned to work together and
Yeah.
trade with each other. So their problem wasn't really there in the way they got along. It was just in the royal interest trying to establish
Right.
their domain there, and
Aristocrats.
how that
Yeah.
worked. And it ended up being English finally. So that's what we have today. So no, I haven't found it. The Oak Island story, the main uh, players, I think there are the Stewart family,
Yeah.
and there's, I could go on for 2 hours. Read one of my
Uh,
books about that. That's
did
it. It's hard
you
to understand, but it's there.
Yeah, no, I know it's so layered, and every time you find a connection, then it's really hard to do this kind of research because it is so kind of
Yeah.
veiled.
Well, there's a
And
connection between Oak Island and the Beale treasure story that's kind of intriguing. That
did you see my real quick before I forget it? I sent you a short little crappy video that I made. I don't know if you got a chance to watch it. You were telling me to send you some screenshots of my alignment from my William and Mary tree of life that goes through two Sephiroth and then goes all the way to the front door of Saint Pierre's cave church, the St. Peter Cave Church in Antioch, and then goes through Istanbul and goes through Oak Island. Well,
interesting.
I followed it all the way through because it runs right through just north of the center of London. Well, what I found in, I believe it's Essex. Have you ever heard of the Bruce Castle
No,
in England? There is a house. Now, this is wild that it doesn't pass through. Like I'm expecting this line through England to cross over cathedrals and Bacon's grave, and like I had high hopes, and it really doesn't. But the one thing it does pass over is a round tower house on this estate property it's called, to this day they refer to it as the Bruce Castle, because when England and Scotland was still together there, the Bruces owned this property.
okay,
Okay. And then after he became the king of Scotland and it was separate, then it went into English hands and it became, oh man, I'm not going to remember. It became like a lordship house, this house. And it's this big home, and very like really cool haunted like history and like all this stuff. But then the gosh, the Duke or whatever of this area, I can't remember it. If I said the name, I feel like you would know it. Um, he sold or rented Bacon. He was a contemporary of Bacon's. They were friends, and Bacon rented a property from him Um, but the whole history of this, and it passes right over this roundhouse that just reminded me. It's just a tower, or the oldest piece on the property, and it's a tower, and it's kind of like back in like this like wooded area, and it's kind of neglected, and it just really reminded me of like the towers and whatnot, and that
Right. It
it
sounds like one of the defensive towers in the borderlands there between Scotland and England. That
no it
one time
no
Robert
it's
Bruce built a bunch of those. Where is
it's
it
in
located?
so I can tell you that
Southern England, Northern England?
I believe it is in Essex.
Yeah, that's not
So
borderland.
no. It's right kind of in the heart of England. So okay, here you go. I screenshotted it because I was smart once. I don't know if you can see that. I'll try to. This is a weird way to do it, but I mean, look at this. Can you see that at all?
Yeah.
It's pretty wild. So that's what it crosses. That alignment crosses right over. And this was Montague's daughter by his first marriage purchased the manor of Tottenham, including the lordship. This was the lordship house in 1625, as it was ennobled as Baron Coleraine, the Baron's Coleraine. He was closely associated with the court of Charles the first Baron Coleraine. Um,
Are there Montagues,
this is
a
just a piece
family, or is that
before
the
that.
title?
I'm not sure. The Coleraine is the title. Hare is the last name. His name was something Hare, and he was the first Baron of Coleraine. He was closely associated with the court of Charles I. Hare's fortunes went into decline during the English Civil War. Obviously, his castle at Longford and his house in Totteridge, which is this house, were seized by parliamentary forces. Returned upon the restoration in a severe state of disrepair. Records of Tottenham from the period are lost, of course, and the ownership and condition of the lordship house during the Commonwealth of England are unknown. Hugh Hare died at that home in Totteridge in 1667, having choked to death on a turkey bone
All
while laughing, which I
right.
thought was hilarious, laughing and drinking. He was succeeded by his son, Henry Hare, second Baron Coleraine. Um, James Townsend owned it for a while, and then Sir William Compton, groomed to the stool of Henry VIII,
All right.
owned was the first was the who built the house.
All right.
Uh, Prominent courtier who acquired the manor of Tottenham in 1514. Um, when Henry VIII met his sister, Henry VIII met his sister Margaret, Queen of Scots, in that house. Um, and he's even quoted Henry VIII as saying, "Master Compton's house beside Tottenham." The Comptons owned the building throughout the 16th century. In the early 17th century, Richard Sackville, third Earl of Dorset, and Lady Anne Clifford owned the house. Lordship House, Thomas Penniston, blah 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 blah. Thomas Temple was said to be blah blah blah. Blah. House was later sold to wealthy Norfolk landowner Hugh Hare. Hugh Hare owned it from '06 to '67.
I've never heard of that family before in anything else I've looked at, but it doesn't mean.
Sir Francis Bacon had a connection with the Compton family, which was the original family. Through a lease agreement, specifically, he leased Canonbury House, owned by Lord Compton, in 1616. This Lord Compton was likely William Compton, first Earl of Northampton, who inherited the title of Baron Compton from his father, Henry Compton. He became a peer in 1572 as Baron Compton of Compton Wynyates. He was created Earl of Northampton. William Compton for blah 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 blah. They both were at Gray's Inn at the same time. Um, I'm sorry, but I immediately saw that he was closely associated with Charles the First, and I was like, "Ooh!" And it's named Bruce Castle and Charles the First, and there's a Bacon connection, and
That's intriguing. Yeah, there's lots of
yeah,
connections there. If you look deeper, you might
I
find
got
some
to keep
more.
going. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sorry to get back on your on
Oh,
your
it's
line
okay.
of thinking, man.
Okay.
You make me just like this kind of field of like study and research. It opens so many doors. When I listen to your stuff, you give me homework every time I listen to you talk, and I got to go travel in 35 different directions because I'm like, oh, I never looked at that. So
Right. Well, I
you're
was
doing
talking
it to me
about
in real time.
there's a really odd connection between Oak Island and possibly the Beale treasure, because when, at one point, French Acadia, the governor was Charles de la Tour.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because his father was basically a spy for Charles the First.
Right.
He actually came, to Nova Scotia as well with Charles. And if you look at that story deeply, it's really intriguing because later in history, the direct descendant of Charles de la Tour was a man named Louis de la Tour. And he married a woman from Lynchburg, Virginia, and lived there.
No shit.
Yeah. And right at the time the Beale papers were released to the public, he only lived a few blocks away
What?
from Morris's boarding house. That's famous as being where the Beale papers came from. That Morris had the papers for many years
Right.
before it was revealed to the public. So the story goes. And he was married to a woman named Alicia Gilmer that was from the family of Thomas Jefferson's physician. you
Of
know.
course.
And it's weird when I went looking into that, I read his papers and diary. Gilmer, I can't remember his first name, Jefferson's doctor. But there's a passage in there where he insists that oh, there's a car alarm going off out there, but he
Yeah.
insists that um, Meriwether Lewis told him they had found a gold mine on the Lewis and Clark expedition. And this is the only place any mention of anything like that comes from. And then later we have all of
Yeah.
the intrigue over Lewis supposedly committing suicide or being killed and his papers taken from him.
Yeah. And
And
the rest of the diaries are heavily edited. Like it's
yeah,
it reminds me, excuse me, a
right.
lot of the Golden Horseshoe diaries. Um, they're heavily edited as well. And again, an expedition. Um, but yeah, that's crazy. Dude, I find that again, this always lends credence to me to the Bacon connection, and that's that Thomas Jefferson pops up. Tommy J.
Oh
It,
yeah,
it,
he I think he was
God,
aware of a lot of these kind of things too, because I told you this in our conversation the other day. He was related to Philip Sidney,
right through
and
the
like
Randolphs,
his
right?
knowledge of what the powder magazine was, or his appreciation of something like that, may have already been known to him before he ever went to William and Mary via the Randolph family, because
Right,
his direct ancestor Thomas Randolph was a diplomatic spy in the Elizabethan era, who
right.
was married to the sister of geez, his name is escaping me right now. Walsingham. He was the
Yeah,
quote spy master of Queen Elizabeth, so he was the brother-in-law of Walsingham, and Philip Sidney was the son-in-law of Walsingham. So here, direct ancestor of Thomas Jefferson was the uncle of Philip Sidney.
right.
So, and Philip Sidney was also involved in spycraft and that type of thing. Hey, I think my car alarm's going off. Let me check.
Yeah, yeah. Take a break. I'll
Hold on.
sing to everybody for a minute.
No, you can cut this out later, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Hold on. Why it's going off?
Well, I'm here by myself, and I'm on. uninteresting in comparison to Cort by myself. Look at his oh, I guess you guys can't see it because I'm flapping my gums, but his microphone is slowly descending. Um, don't know what we're gonna do next week, but Daniel should be back. If he's not, I'm gonna beat him. Um, but Cort's coming back in, so I'll shut my mouth.
Okay, the kind of stuff that happens in the middle of a radio interview, right? I don't know why it went off. No one was breaking into it or anything. It just, I
Oh,
might
I'm
have,
glad you got to take a peek anyway to make
I might
sure.
have sat on the key or something
Oh yeah.
that made it go off. But it's good to know it works anyway.
No kidding, man.
Anyway, we were with Thomas Jefferson, and
Yeah.
I was
His
talking
Randolph
about,
connection. And
yeah, he was.
can you talk a little
Yeah,
bit? Um, so what is it called? The Randolph folio. I've
yeah,
heard you mention that a couple times, and it's interesting, and I have not heard of it or seen it anywhere except for
and
in
you
your
won't.
talk.
You
It's
won't because you can look it up. The false folio is what it's known as.
false folio of
Yeah,
Shakespeare.
and this was kind of a compilation of some of the plays of Shakespeare
Okay.
from an earlier, a little bit earlier than the first folio.
Right.
And some of the sources said that the play Isle of the Dogs by Nash and Ben Jonson
Right. We're in it.
was part of that. And the Randolphs owned a copy of it. And so this eventually came in, to the
Yeah.
possession of Thomas Jefferson, and it was in the library at UVA where it supposedly burnt in a fire, which is kind of a
Right.
fishy story. I think maybe it still exists somewhere.
Yeah.
That
But
play,
it's
Isle of the Dogs, was banned in England, and both Johnson and Nash spent time in jail because it was
because of it.
uh, something in it offended the king.
Now, I just find that
So,
interesting because it could possibly at least point to a little bit more solid evidence that Shakespeare was like written by committee, you know,
yeah,
and
possibly, and landing to the mystique of that. If you go to the actual Isle of the Dogs in London,
yeah.
it's on the Greenwich Meridian, and there's a remnant of a tower there that was supposedly built by Dr. John Dee.
Good
According
God.
to some people, who knows if it's
Yeah.
true, but there
Right.
are accounts of that, and they call it Dee's Tower, and it's just a little circular foundation. That's all that's left there.
Yeah.
So it
Now
is
this.
intriguing that John Dee we know is an accomplished astronomer and
Oh
thought
yeah.
math and just knew about all that. So if he,
The cipher writer and code writer and whatnot. Oh,
yeah,
and also to clear it up for people, the line there kind of succession goes Philip Sidney. It turns into at some point the Randolph family who ends up in Virginia,
yeah,
right?
well, he's related to them would be my,
Right.
and they obviously valued this relation because even subsequent members of the Randolph family were named Philip Sidney Randolph,
Right. Right.
Algernon Sidney Randolph, and Algernon was another influence into the Declaration of Independence that is named as one of the influences of Thomas Jefferson in writing that too.
Right.
Even who was it? The later Henry Lee even accused Jefferson of plagiarizing it.
Really.
Yeah, so this is among one of my many candidates to be the one of the remaining cipher keys to the remaining Beale ciphers that haven't been broken. So I have a whole
Really.
list from following this kind of line of thought, what they could be, what the cipher keys could be. And, I found all kinds of strange connections, like the one to the lost Civil War gold I told you about earlier,
Yeah.
Robert Enoch Withers. Look at even his name.
Yeah. His name is Enoch Withers. So you got
Yeah.
Book of Emblems. That's the other thing I find with this is they build these clues into the names too. Um,
Sure, they have a
eh,
family tradition that they
yeah,
obviously keep alive. Like the earliest Henry Lee named his estate Ditchley after the original Henry Lee, who was a confidant of Queen Elizabeth in England, was also named Ditchley, and that
wow.
he also owned the property that would become Shugborough Hall. Where
Let's talk about Shugborough because that lends like credence to obviously the Tower of the Four Winds and the Powder Magazine and just the Sydney like all that connection to, because I find it hard sometimes, when I'm looking at it, because you find all these things over in England and then all these things end up transferring over here. But a lot of times, all the research is to all the stuff that's going on in England and then in one place, and then all this research of the stuff going on in America. And people forget that this was such a, when we were a colony, it was really transitional. It was back and forth and back and forth. And
sure,
people who were on the outs with the aristocracy cruised over
yeah,
here to, and vice versa. They'd go back if they were that
right.
good. And
They were disaffected or they were on the wrong
yeah,
side of things or the losing side anyway. Like during Bacon's Rebellion, and Virginia is famous for always kind of being loyal to the royalty.
yeah,
Even during the Commonwealth period of England, they still were, Jacobites or Cavaliers. Sound familiar?
yeah. Virginia Cavaliers, go
Yeah,
Who's.
WVA, exactly.
Yeah,
They got
Wahoo's.
that name for their sports teams or mascots or whatever. So that's pretty common. But interestingly, at Shugborough Hall, this represents the people that had the power and resources to actually know all of this information, that the Stuart family had an unusual value of the concept of Arcadia, the works of Virgil, and Philip Sidney's book Arcadia. I mean, Charles I even quoted from Sidney's book right before he was beheaded.
Yeah, that
And
that
there's
that
several
does
other
thing.
examples of a value of them. Like we just discussed earlier, he consulted Charles I consulted the Aeneid of Virgil using bibliomancy prior to what actually happened. So,
Right.
so that's not uncommon. So Admiral Anson and his brother Thomas, and Thomas is who built the Shepherd's Monument at Shugborough Hall. He's responsible
Right.
for that, and that has a rendering, a mirror relief bas relief image of the Poussin painting, The Shepherds of Arcadia, and it even says "Et in Arcadia Ego," on it, just
Right.
like the painting does. So they're suggesting an Arcadian theme, and there's a Tower of the Winds reproduction at Shugborough Hall. But what we see in the Anson brothers, Thomas and his famous brother, Admiral Anson, who's famous for being the third Englishman to circumnavigate the globe, and in so doing, capturing the Spanish treasure galleon, Manila treasure galleon, and coming home fabulously rich just from his
Right.
the takings. But they were both involved in spying on the French and targeting whatever large amount of gold they could. And Thomas Anson was a diplomatic spy. He traveled in circles of musicians in Rome and France and associated with people who were Jacobites, who were exiled from England, that were the supporters of James I or Bonnie Prince Charlie later. That he was spying on all of these people. So that's not a surprise. And then Admiral Anson also had a spy network associated with the British Navy, where they would, capture all these French ships laden with gold going to the New World or trying to supply the Jacobite rebellion in 1745. There's a noted Admiral Anson commissioned a painting of this encounter between his ship and the ship that was taking Bonnie Prince Charlie to Scotland that got away, and he made it there.
Right.
So even in Nova Scotia, we see that two times Fortress Louisbourg was sacked by the English, and
Mhm.
millions and millions of dollars, like what
Unaccounted
today
for.
would be $1 billion worth of gold, half of it's unaccounted for. They got
Right.
recovered half of it, but half of it is still missing. And this leads me to believe that that's involved with the Oak Island story as well, that possibly some of that was hidden there because it was a known place to stash things, or that even Admiral Anson had found out about this and went there in search of trying to capture whatever had been put there.
Right.
This is like an opposing um, mythology that they became hip to, via
Right.
spying. And so Sir Francis Dashwood, who was the later spy master during this 18th century now era of Admiral Anson and Thomas Anson, um, was also directly associated with Benjamin Franklin, who, prior to the time that we became our own country, Ben Franklin was actually working for Sir Francis Dashwood and was personal friends with him. And this is where he, attended the Hellfire Club meetings and all
Right.
this juicy, stuff that can be misinterpreted, I believe, by a lot of people. But Sir
There's
Francis,
got to be a little bit of there though, right?
oh,
I mean,
sure, sure.
there's
But
still
Sir
wearing
Francis
cloaks and
Dashwood,
doing weird. Yeah.
let me finish first. That
Yeah. Yeah. Go
he
ahead.
also had a architecture on his estate, like the Tower of the Winds and a thing.
Franklin did.
No, Sir
Oh,
Francis
Dashwood.
Dashwood.
Okay.
So yeah, that's no surprise later that Benjamin Franklin was given a land grant in Nova Scotia. A lot of people don't know that, and he actually sent people there to maintain his property that he ended up giving to his brother, who was a loyalist.
Oh wow.
His brother remained
Oh
in,
yeah.
yeah,
Yep.
during the Revolution. So
Did you watch the ridiculous series Franklin with
Michael Douglas, I think
could
it was.
yeah, he pulled a full on Kevin Costner and was the only person in the entire production that didn't have an accent.
Right.
I always compare when people do, how do you do that? How do they make Robin Hood and not know that Costner couldn't do a
Right.
an English accent?
Well, he was American for starters. I mean, the colonies did maybe breed a different
Yeah,
accent,
but
possibly, but it was
they
pretty
had
good.
to.
I thought I enjoyed it. It
No,
revealed.
I did too. I watched the entire thing, but I just when I saw that it was going to be him playing Franklin, I was like, huh. And then he kind of crushed it, and I
I
really like
thought he did too. I thought he did a good job.
I really like Lafayette.
Yeah, he was good too, and
He was.
Temple was good too. The his nephew
Oh,
Franklin's nephew.
that's the other thing too. I was telling you about the octagonal structure in Petersburg, right? That
Yeah,
the
the
direct
mercantile.
descendant of Pocahontas built and then put in a trust to the city so that it can never be moved. Directly across the river, the Appomattox River from that is it's kind of a rocky folly area, kind of like the Richmond James River
Sure,
area.
where the fall line is, right?
Yeah. And so the Appomattox is like that there. Well, at some point during the Revolution, Lafayette sat up on the hill. It's now called Colonial Heights, that area. It's across from Petersburg. He sat up on that hill, and in John Rolfe's descendants, the bowling mansion that I told you about, the people who created the octagonal structure that can never leave Petersburg, um, a English general was sick, and they had taken Petersburg, and they kind of had him, nursing him back to health in that mansion. And so for like weeks, it might have been months, I can't remember the time frame, but Lafayette sat up on that hill and just shot cannon at that mansion for like weeks and just didn't get. I mean, he got like the Noriega treatment. He just kept
Right.
shelling him and shelling him until finally the English were like, all right, and they literally left. But you can find Lafayette's that's the thing about Virginia, is people don't appreciate it. But like, just you can't find it anymore. There's no plaque or anything like that, but the old heads from town, they know where to go. And Lafayette's initials are etched into the rock. He carved
Wow.
his, you know what I mean? Like that Virginia
Sure.
is so, lousy with history that
It
the
is.
initials of the Marquis Lafayette are in a rock somewhere. People are like, yeah, it's somewhere around here.
Should be
Really?
like a state park at least.
Yeah, no kidding. I'm sorry, derailed you again.
That's
Shugborough, my bad.
right.
And
Yeah.
and if we're getting to the point where you need to cut it,
Oh,
like
we're
I said,
fine.
okay,
We're doing all right.
okay, cool,
I'll let you know.
okay,
Uh,
cool,
yeah, Shugborough is just kind of your archetype of a lot of English estates around that time and before. I mean, even um, during the Elizabethan age and then the Stuarts, this was just a popular motif based on the popularity of Philip Sidney's book and the works of Virgil and their
right.
appreciation of history as it was. And the whole Arcadian theme, was instilled into mansions and homes, and even later the landscaping was to try to recreate just this pastoral landscape that
And Arcadia, for those who don't know, that was like a Greek, like
yes,
kind of depiction of like paradise, right?
yeah,
It was
well,
kind of
according
Edenish
that's the way
ish.
Virgil presented it.
Okay, right. Okay.
Even in Greece, Arcadia is kind of on the western part of the Peloponnesian Peninsula. It's an isolated place that's rural,
Mm-hmm.
that where life was idyllic and simple. And so
Mm-hmm.
powerful, noble people kind of like longed for this kind of concept that,
Mm-hmm.
that during times of revolution or the public disagreeing with them and all of the hardships that supposedly they had to put up with, they would long for this Arcadian ideal. Plus, they all believed they were descendant of them, as I discussed
Okay.
earlier,
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
they had migrated
The
and become
Trojan.
the Merovingians and the
Yeah.
tribe of Benjamin and all of that involved was their kind of link to the divine right of kings.
Right.
That they're the voice and hand of God on earth, and this is one way this mythology of Arcadia confirmed all of that for them, or was an excuse for them to
Man.
believe it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Somebody said it, and
yeah,
then they were
yeah,
like, "Yeah, that's it. That
yeah.
sounds
And
good."
it's a history.
God, can
So,
you?
yeah,
I mean, and really has led to what 75% of the Western conflict. Like, you know what I mean? Like, just this cousins battling cousins over titles. I mean,
right,
it's
or whatever. Just even the American Revolution and French Revolution are all
yeah,
based on opposing those kinds of ideas, obviously, and it
yeah,
have a big impact on, even the English Civil War when Charles I was defeated and beheaded. That part of it was because they supported Catholic faith.
right.
They also believed they were special because they were Merovingian, that they thought they had a direct line back to the original Jewish people. And then later, this mythology developed, I think, starting in the 1700s, that they were descendant of Christ. And the whole
Right,
mythology of Mary Magdalene developed
right.
in relation to that. And that's what the whole Rain Le Chateau story informs you of. If you're curious, I'm going to look into this treasure story.
Yeah,
That's what you'll learn. You'll learn that, it was a Merovingian important city,
yeah,
surrounding Rain Le Chateau. Now that they're Merovingian, some Merovingian royalty is entombed somewhere there, maybe below the
right,
church. So it's part of the story they used to develop they left a treasure too. And then
right.
you go looking into that, you learn all of this about Merovingians and what they believe, and the solemn.
It's almost like paired everywhere. When there's this intense old treasure story, there's also this bloodline proof, like
Yeah, and
side
it's the way
side
they
by side
preserved
with
it.
it.
It's like we say,
Yeah,
history comes and goes. It might not be known, but the
these
treasure
stories.
story might be known. And then when you look into it, you'll find all of this.
I mean, because that's kind of the Arthurian. I feel like that feeds into the Arthurian
That's a form of the
stories and whatnot.
character Arcus, who
Right.
the namesake of Arcadia, who through mythology, right? The
Yeah.
Arcus was cast into the heavens as Ursa Minor, and his mother Callisto was Ursa Major. So the pole star is in the tail of Ursa Minor, And so this is how the theme of Arcadia becomes associated with these octagonal structures that form a prime meridian
I
based
was
on
about,
the pole
yeah,
star. So that's another important reason that these people value the copies of the Tower of the Winds, or why the powder
right,
magazine was built, the Newport
right,
Tower, all of these places. And then later it became sort of pop culture, if you will, among
yeah.
nobility, that they would build these things on their estates and try to create their own little personal Arcadia.
Now, so this is something I've been kind of coming to the more because I always saw it, especially within monarchies and the nobles, these intense change of power, and it always, definitely with the Reformation and whatnot, but it's always Catholics versus Protestants, and that's really like touted as the reason. And I feel like to a certain to the lay, or not to the lay person, but to the peasant, that's what it was, because they almost created kind of this control structure of religion, and you pump that into everybody, and then they have a thing to galvanize around, and then when something comes up to, um it's almost an excuse, but because I'm not explaining this very well, but the 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 mainstream story is that Catholics and Protestants were fighting in the West, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. But when I really look at it, I see bloodline families fighting back and forth and back and forth and back and forth.
That's part
Eh,
of it, because some of them would adapt the Protestant,
right, because you see,
view.
like, within the Stuarts, yeah, definitely Catholic, but then also, if you are that Catholic, that you are, then you're not going to be like some of those Stuart monarchs who are like, yeah, but we're going to brush up with Protestant on the,
Well, they
like,
got the best of both worlds, didn't they? Sort of.
yes, that back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And that's what leads me to believe that it really was this familial bloodline thing, and that's where these stories come from, with each of these bloodlines tying them back to a divine right to rule. And it does, um it does lend some credence to the fact that a lot of organized, that possibly organized religion, um in some of these ways, was really just used to control people. Because how many of the peasants, yeah, you've got your rah-rah knights and things like that, who are going to fight and die for their dude, but like, how many peasants are going to go, I don't care who's the king, my status doesn't change any. But you attach it to a religion, and you say, we're Catholics, and these Protestants, this new thing is coming in and trying to, well, yeah, you can get everybody in the country I mean, you get everybody in the country to march off to the Middle East, and,
Right. Still like that.
and do the, engage in the Crusades. It just, the more and more I look into this stuff, the more it looks like just these pockets of families, and it goes back, and like you were saying, the Merovingian, they started off pagan,
Right.
and then they dropped that and they became Christian. Well, Christianity was getting pretty powerful, you know
Right at that
and
time. Yeah,
right
exactly.
at that time. So it really doesn't seem to me, yeah, of course you're going to have people who
Yeah,
are
they
true
adapted
believers, but
Christianity from a point of weakness. They had been kind of usurped by the Carolinians, the family of Charlemagne,
right,
who were related. But how what all of these disputes with royalty is who really belongs to have the title
who's got the
in the
closest claim,
succession, right? And
yeah,
the Carolingians had the closer, more solid bloodline for that. And the same thing with the Stuarts when they were ejected, finally after William
right,
and Mary, coincidentally, you know,
yeah,
that they brought in their German cousins, to that
yeah,
were just as related to the Stuarts, but they were from the female line, not the male line.
right,
So that was the whole people were funny about this too. I mean, even when the United States was established, there are some people who wanted a king, whether it was
Yeah.
just a figurehead or not. And
Yeah, I remember, Adams is just he's one of my favorite people in history. And but he does have that
he
little
wanted
tinge
that. Yeah.
of like, dude, shut up. Like we
Yeah.
got a good thing going. I know that you don't want to,
Jefferson was the kibosh, that person that
I
didn't
do
want
feel
that.
like it's amazing in our history that we just happen to have those two guys with a strong man like Washington. But you had Jefferson and Adams who balanced each other out, because had it all been left in Jefferson's hands, I feel like our revolution would have probably went the way of the French Revolution, and we would be back to a monarchy.
Maybe.
Because
I don't know.
he
He
was
wasn't in favor
amazing.
of that. He didn't want that.
I know, but he was a little. I I think for the time he was a little bit too loosey goosey. You know what I mean? Like you had to have
Well,
Adams, who was a little bit more law minded. I mean, yeah, Jefferson had a law degree and whatnot, but I feel like well, I think it's just the difference in a Virginian aristocrat and
a
the little
normal guy
more
from
hard
New England.
scrabble Yankee,
Right. That's
which
what
is
led to the Civil War later, the exact dynamic you're kind of talking about there,
yeah,
where
it
Jefferson promoted this thing where everybody would have their own little Arcadia.
right,
It was impractical with the kind of Dutch, German, English background of New Englanders. It was
right.
culturally different and more industrial based than the South, even at the time of the American Revolution. So that kind of led to the Civil War later, in my opinion. And let's not forget the most interesting fact of the dynamic between Jefferson and Adams was they both died on the same day.
And they both spoke of each other in maybe not their last words, but
They corresponded and they wrote letters to each other all the
yeah.
time, even though they were supposed to hate each other. They ended,
And let's not forget that it was the 4th of freaking July.
yeah, on the 4th of July to boot.
And wasn't it like the 50th anniversary
Yeah, it was
of the
something.
fourth?
It was
Yeah, it was
crazy.
the 50th anniversary of the 4th of July. John Adams and 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 Thomas Jefferson die on the 50th anniversary of the 4th of July.
Just crazy.
And both of their like within their last breaths, some of their last breaths, they spoke about each other. I think one of them even said, I can't remember which one was like, Jefferson beat me again, or John beat me again. I mean, they were
One
definitely
died
on
first. Exactly.
friendly terms um at that point. But
But one who died
damn,
last said, "Oh, I can go now. He already died."
yeah,
No problem.
it's incredible, man. I don't think enough uh, I read that McCullough John Adams biography like at least once a year.
Right. I need
I've
to
read
read that. I should. I haven't
I
read.
read it twice this year. I think that Abigail Adams should probably have a statue
Oh,
somewhere. You
she
read,
obviously, yeah,
yeah,
shirts.
you read that book and you're like, no, she should have been the president. Our first president, our first female president probably should have been our first president.
He probably
Uh,
probably practically was when he was president. So
yeah,
anyway,
oh yeah, I think so. She kept him from hiring a king probably a lot of the time. If she'd have had her way, slavery would have ended day one.
right.
You know, that's something people don't
Yeah,
forget,
that's
but
one of the more
or don't
kind of
remember.
I guess questionable things about Thomas
Jefferson.
Jefferson. If you look at his how he
Yeah,
flip flop on slavery a lot, you can see what a politician he was.
I think he was a politician. I think he also,
He would
the
bend with
guy.
the winds of whatever was popular.
Yeah, well,
Not
and also the guy was not great with money,
no.
and he had inherited and built all this land, and as gross as it is,
He wouldn't
he
give it up. Right.
he couldn't give it up, or he would be destitute. I mean, he pretty much died destitute. I mean,
Right. And this is one of the reasons
essentially.
today we have a good pension for the president, and supposedly it's supposed to work that way, that they're left with enough money that they don't need to do things like that or manipulate their legacy and
Right.
things like that. So it probably should have been that way then too, that he was somehow
Yeah.
compensated for the rest of his life for what he had done. I mean, look at everything
Yeah.
he did. I mean, just the time he spent in France,
Oh yeah.
promoting the revolution. He, among all the founding fathers, was uniquely prepared for that, I think,
Yeah.
with his
Yeah.
education that we discussed at William and Mary. There weren't a
Yeah.
lot of people in America that were educated to that degree yet.
Well, and with his influence from again another kind of unsung hero, George Wythe. I mean,
Oh
that
yeah, he
guy
learned
had
all the
his shit
law from him. Yeah.
together. Yeah, I mean, that guy was incredible. Um, but yeah, I mean, I'm both the it couldn't have happened. Obviously, because I think Nathaniel Bacon, had he not, you know,
Right. It's all a
pooped
chain of
himself to death.
yeah.
Unfortunately, poor guy. Had he
And
not
he set
pooped
the
himself
trend
to
there
death,
that they
it
admired.
might have, yeah, it, we might have been free of the monarchy earlier. And actually, to be honest with you, there were less people, obviously, at that time. But I think the more wildernessy, aspect of the colonies and stuff like that, I think we might have had an actual easier time.
So, well, that's what it was kind of like. It was the more rural folk against the, landed gentry who all lived
Yeah.
in Williamsburg area, mostly, even if they had property elsewhere,
I
that
think there's a possibility that England might have, given up the ghost a little bit easier
possibly, but they still
had it
had the other
started.
colonies already going, at that time. It was more than just Virginia. And I'm
Yeah, they
sure
did.
they were terrified of the whole thing spreading, to
Yeah.
other colonies as well. But again,
Yeah.
the Civil War dynamic, the New England colonies were more fairly administered in that manner.
Yeah.
It didn't become a monopoly of people buying the head rights for a colonist to come
Yeah.
in exchange for their land. So the Virginians kind of had a racket going, the ones that had been there long.
Oh yeah.
So that kind of
Oh,
what
it's still like that. I mean,
that
I
was
mean,
kind of
those,
rocking the boat at the time too. So
yeah. I mean, those families are still, I
oh yeah.
mean, I know somebody who's very involved in colonial Williamsburg, big time.
Oh yeah,
And
they
his,
value their heritage and everything. I
oh
don't
yeah.
they still have the kind of, some of them might, the financial power they used to.
No.
You know,
Yeah.
some of the more powerful families like the Burwells and
Yeah.
don't, or the Lees but yeah, I've met a few people, that are
Yeah.
directly with the same names even, when
Yeah.
I went to college and everything, that are, they're proud of their heritage and they're aware of it too. I mean, these are
Oh yeah.
people you can talk to, that you and I could chat about all this stuff with, that they would understand what we're
Yeah.
talking
The
about.
Tylers. I
Yep.
mean,
The
goodness sakes.
Taylors, the Tylers, you know, the descendants of Madison,
Yeah.
Monroe, all of it. There's still some around, and definitely the Burwells. And the Randolphs have a lot of people around too, still
Yeah.
related.
Yeah. I've done two talks at the Randolph Lodge in Petersburg,
Mhm.
which they still have the original charter for that lodge with the Randolph's signature, right? It's incredible. It's
Right.
like, yeah. I don't know where you were, or if you
Where
want to
was
keep
I?
going, or
We can go for a little while more.
um
We were just
I
talking about
wonder,
connections. Like, it's amazing how all these places are connected by, like you were saying, you can go there and see the architecture, and
yeah.
you'll have an inference of what's going on, where everybody else will just say, "Oh,
Yeah, it's just
cool."
pretty gardens. Well, that
That's
might be
just
a
one
good,
way art, architecture, even music was
yeah.
used, and literature that
Yeah.
I've concentrated on.
Yeah.
That all these books, like Amadis de Gala talks about the Holy Grail and an island where a treasury is,
Right.
that's reminiscent of the Oak Island story.
That might be kind of a cool place to not to sum it up, but kind of talk about, is just uh finishing up this installment, because I'm gonna force you to come back and talk to him
Sure.
if I haven't driven you too crazy. But
No,
kind of coming circling back to Williamsburg itself and just throwing out, some of this weird stuff, some of my research, and um just these connect. I know I'm from Williamsburg, and so I'm biased, but good God, all roads point back to Jamestown, and really, I think Williamsburg more so than Jamestown. But like every time I get into, I mean, here's what I wanted to ask you is, I find Williamsburg to be super plastic nowadays. I grew up in that town, and you might as
tourism.
well, yeah, you might as well live in Orlando. You know what I mean? It's Orlando with like this history thing over here.
Sure.
And nobody, and the amount of, I mean, everybody goes crazy about the alignments and the layout of like DC and stuff like that. Well,
Hmm.
a lot of that was based on Williamsburg.
Yeah, the
And
same value at play, definitely.
nobody, I mean, nobody talks. I mean, that's kind of what the whole point of this podcast is that, Williamsburg has some of, if not the richest history in the country. I mean, this is where it began.
Yeah, so
um
many stories, and a lot of them are related to William and Mary too,
oh yeah.
and the works. I mean, all the people, the whole where everything Virginia sprang from, and all these other, you know, families are related to
Oh
some.
yeah, do a genealogy of
Yeah,
any family in this country, and you will find a line back to Jamestown. I mean, obviously you got the Mayflower folks up north, but like it's incredible. Me and my mom got really heavily into our genealogy,
all
and
right. And it's
all
incredible that a lot of people think they don't even know Jamestown was there before.
you know
You know,
Plymouth Rock
the
is what
colony.
everybody knows.
It was there for what, 13 years prior.
Yeah. And
You
here's
know,
my question to you relating to that. Do you think that is just by happenstance? Or do you think that because of the kind of secrecy surrounding a lot of the like people and the things in Virginia, that maybe it was purposefully just kind of not, I mean, obviously they built, Rockefellers came in and it created this living museum, but it doesn't seem to be Virginia in
get what you're
particular.
saying, what you're getting at. Like,
It's
why
all
would people think that that was first? And
right. What
even
it
taught in
almost,
school that way.
yeah, what it feels obfuscated. And
It's
when I
because,
look at Virginia as a whole, that we are, you go to the other side of conspiracy, right? We have the most military in this state. We have the most military bases. We have the most defense contractors. We spend the most. The defense budget is spent the most CIA. We have the most secretive CIA base in the world.
yep,
Is the farm, is Camp
we
Perry.
can't talk about it.
Yeah, dude, I've been, spent like a week like digging into like old agents, like talking the few words they'd be willing to talk about when they were at Camp Perry. And oh, it's wild. But I was like, at the end of it, I was like, yeah, I don't need this in my search history.
Yeah,
What am I doing here?
don't
But
even think about it.
but you never like, what I noticed, I'm upset. Well, I tell everybody, like, my big thing is like kind of hidden history and like the stuff that we're talking about, right?
Mm.
That's my big love in this thing. And that's kind of gotten mashed into the conspiracy game. And I'm fine with that because I also love conspiracies. And I always tell people I collect them like people collect comic books. Like,
Yeah,
I don't believe in all of them by far,
I used to believe a lot more.
but
When
I'm willing
I
to
started
entertain
doing
any of
this,
them.
but
Yeah.
I've kind of gotten away from it because a lot of those things are too promoted for specific reasons as well.
Well, and that's a conspiracy in
Yeah,
its
so much of
self.
it,
Yeah.
involves like fake history,
Yeah.
things that just aren't true.
Well, and
And
that's a bummer about hidden history is there's things you're talking about and things that I talk about that are 100%. documented, but hidden history has now got mashed into mud flood. You
Right.
know what I mean?
And that's
And
on purpose too.
yes, because there are things that are, and that was bringing it all back around. That was my question to you. I feel like there are a lot of secrets within Williamsburg.
Mm-hmm.
I think the influence of the Capitol and Jefferson and Bacon and Wythe and William and Mary and the huge Masonic influence and kind of
President.
this the presidents and all this kind of like this just like kind of background of esotericism that just kind of sits behind everything, and the secretive nature of a crypto Catholic like Sir Gabriel Archer
The
being like,
Archer reliquary. We'll have to get into that next time because that's
yeah.
very, very revealing.
And I just think there's much more there, and I actually think that the Rockefeller hand in
Oh, they
uh,
spent money finding all this stuff out themselves, and that's
right.
why they appreciate it. And I'd like to say, I think their influence isn't a bad thing
No,
at
I
all.
well
Some people,
well
how they're viewed in other
I go both
conspiracy
ways.
theory,
I
right?
go both ways. It's kind of like Marie Hall, right?
Uh-huh.
No, it we may not be having this conversation about a Bruton vault and the actual reason for the Bruton vault had she not come with her
Yeah. Oh
wacky
no,
new age thing.
yeah,
And I
I'm
think the
saying
same
she
thing,
deserves a lot of credit
yeah.
and actually found out and did some real research. I'm not totally poo-pooing
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, I
what she
know.
did. I'm just saying the way it later became interpreted, got associated with all of this kind of mystical things that I
Yeah,
didn't see when I really looked at the practical
right.
aspects of what was going on. So,
Well, I see the same thing with a similar thing with the Rockefellers in that, yes, they contributed greatly to a lot of preservation of certain history. But I think, like you said, they know a lot of this
they were
stuff,
so interested in it. I think they probably hired people to research it and
but
find
it's not in the
out.
forefront of the history. And some of
And what
this is
they found was
the
all
actual
practical
history.
stuff. I don't think it's related to anything.
No, you don't think so? Because
Now,
I mean, there's a faction of the Rockefellers that have been obsessed with the like kind of esoteric secret side of things, and really putting a lot of money. You've got your kind of Rockefeller Republican side, which is very like kind of mainstream milk toast
there might be a
government
reason for them promoting that
industry.
kind of stuff too, because I see, in conspiracy theory, a lot of concepts like UFOs, even the myths and legends of
Yeah.
Mount Shasta. I mean, there's a sect of people up there worshiping Saint Germain.
Yes, I know.
And
The same.
the real Saint Germain was involved in everything we're talking about,
I know. I know.
not in the way they think
I
either.
know he doesn't come back every 10 years to like go
Right.
to a cocktail party. It- it- Again, I collect conspiracies like comic books, and so I'll listen to somebody talk nonsense about Saint
Right.
Germain because it's like watching a movie. But again, like I told you when we had a conversation prior to the podcast, the actual history of Saint Germain
Is
is
more
so
freaky.
freaking interesting, and it gets muddied by this nonsense, and
And that's
again,
it. That's why I'm saying it's on purpose.
it's on purpose, and that's
Yeah.
kind of a
Yeah.
Rosicrucian thing,
You're supposed to
right?
weed through that and check yourself and see, whatever real tidbits you can come up with. And I did come up with the, uh, this real historical information. Like he was associated with the Ansons of Shugborough Hall.
Of course he
He
was.
attended social functions they were present at, and they were known of each other. And he died. I forget the Hess Castle family member that he died in his home, but he was a cousin of George II, that where Saint Germain passed away. And if you look at the raw hard facts, he was a Hanoverian English spy who
Okay, well, that makes sense.
affected some of the dynamics that brought the French Revolution into play. this is why you hear the stories of him being friends with Madame Pompadour
Yep.
and warning them that what was going to happen, and that what he warned them was going to happen happened.
Yeah.
So, there's some real aspects to that all infer that even he was, part of the intelligence service apparatus of Sir Francis Dashwood and the Ansons, that he, as a mystic. I mean, if you look at Cagliostro, one of the other mystics too, he was actually busted promoting a false treasure story and collecting money from people.
Well, look,
Stuff like that. So
well,
it's
and these mystics there is a long history right up to present day of mystics being involved in the intelligence
oh yeah,
services.
because
John, I mean John
they
D.
know
Bacon,
it affects
Marlowe,
people's political opinions when you break it all down.
all
That
the
the
way up to Crowley, and
yeah,
then even the the crazy dude who created the Temple of Set.
right.
Um,
That
uh,
you're right. You're totally right. And look at the the Ron L. Hubbard was a member of, and he created Scientology, and
yep,
Jimmy Page,
yeah,
had a cult of his own in a different artistic way.
yeah.
But
Oh,
a lot of
yeah.
those
Well,
people,
a Led Zeppelin fan might as well be a cult member for sure. Like a diehard Zeppelin fan. Yeah, that's
or
I
deadheads
love.
even, I mean,
Yeah. Oh well, and then you look at the intelligence, and we're veering into a little bit more of my territory. But you look into the uh the intelligence folks who were involved with the dead. Have you ever looked into that?
right. Or even the Topanga Canyon thing,
Oh yeah,
all of that, how, and
yeah,
it's true, popular culture does affect people's political opinions. There's no doubt about that. And
yeah,
you can kind of see, that whole movement created kind of a cultural revolution and during the Vietnam War in the late to 60s and early 70s. And what
yeah,
was that, just something somebody was trying to accomplish by affecting these points of view in the public? So pop culture is very important to
yeah.
consider, and it's
And when you're looking
valuable.
back at what we were talking about, I mean, these great minds and people like we're talking about, the Jeffersons and stuff like that. They were the pop culture kind of stars of
Right. And
their
it was a
era.
lot easier to manipulate then,
Yeah.
if you could control what books people were reading or the
Hmm.
newspaper. There you go. That's
Well,
always
that's what gets me with the Rockefellers and the Hearsts
the
and
medium, right?
stuff like that.
They were savvy enough to,
Yeah.
control that, or affect the way they were presented in the media. And if you look at today, I mean, the whole UFO scene has gotten, when I was a
Yeah.
kid, I was really into all of that. And it was never trust the government, never do
Yeah.
that.
And now we're hanging on every word of a congressional hearing. Are
Right.
you kidding me? The
And they
exact
finally,
guys they hired to hide it are the guys that
exactly,
were, yeah,
they
what are
give
you
us all
talking
these
about?
pictures from, aircraft, and they're still fuzzy, blurry, pictures, just
Yeah.
like we're used
And
to.
then we're debating whether or not it's our technology or something else's. And we're is it our technology? Because we're still watching CCTV comparable footage of these things from our
Yeah.
aircraft.
Where's
Like, what are you talking about here?
everybody in
That
the world's walking around with a 4K camera in their pocket?
Yeah, it's
Uh,
either a conspiracy that they're purposely obscuring it, or it's a conspiracy that there is something out there and they're purposely obscuring it. There's
It is
no
affecting
other.
politics. I think it bleeds over into,
Yeah,
they're trying to get you to vote a certain way based on what they're telling you
fear,
about this,
fear, and I think that's
subject
the
to that.
exact same way that they've done it all through time. And again, the same people that we're talking about, these the bloodline aristocracy and stuff like that. Fear is the number one
Uh,
way to push people towards a decision that you want them to make, and they've done it. Fear of the Protestants. Oh, Protestants push fear of the Catholics. Catholics push fear of the guys who stole the Holy Land from us, and we
all
got to
right.
go over and kill all them. And it's
Oh, that's
fear,
going
fear,
on
fear,
big
fear,
time right
fear.
now. Yeah.
Oh
The
my
whole, yeah, that's terrible. The whole Israel and Iran
dude, I
conflict. It's scary.
I'm I'm blown away by what's going on and how, I mean, we're just going. I mean, I guess this is just how it is, like it was in World War II. Also, like you got to go about your daily life, and we are teetering on the brink of Armageddon here. I
Of
mean, we
disaster.
really, really are.
It's crazy. Hopefully, well, it won't happen. So just think positive.
No, I hopefully, it something's going to happen, but I think we're just kicking the can down the road, and we have been for a long, long time. I mean, that situation over there, I just
Been going on for thousands of years too. That's
don't
what
think.
the same problem, the same conflict has been there for so long.
Yeah,
Even I guess 1,000 years, 2,000 years since the time of Christ, even if
yeah.
not before, the Jews have been persecuted or kicked out of their property and want it back. They've got
Yep.
it back now, and they ain't going to give it up for nothing. And I don't
No, and
blame them, and I don't blame the other side either. So,
no, I don't. It's a situation. It is a perfect storm that I don't think there's any solution for.
yeah,
I really just don't think there's a solution for. And again, when you get, religion involved in statehood, it's there isn't going to be a solution for it. I mean, you're dying for your soul
right. And that's the
on
beauty of
both
what the
sides.
United States is supposed to be.
And then we go back to Francis Bacon, and I really feel like that guy had the idea for this thing. I think that's why he was involved in the Virginia Company of London. I think his ideals. Now, I'm not saying he was the greatest guy.
Well,
Um,
everybody admired what he was saying about that, like in
yeah,
Atlantis and everything, and they were
yeah,
inspired by that. So,
and I
like
do
Thomas
think that.
Jefferson obviously was.
Yeah, I do think that that was the point. That really was the point. And we got pretty close. Now we might be burning it down in record time as far as civilizations
All right.
go.
I'm having faith that that will persevere. It's
Yeah,
all we can do because it is just the best idea that's been
it's
around.
the best
The
we
whole
got.
out of this organizing a whole country and political system and stuff. It's not perfect, but it's head and shoulders above monarchies and you know
Yeah.
dictators and things like that, where people have a voice and different factions of people can live and survive without being persecuted here. So
Hmm. And talk
that's a
shit
good
about the
place
other
to
side
wind
if
it
need be.
down. I think we should
I
wind it
think it
down,
is. I
and
think it is.
we'll come back next week if you want and do another one or whenever.
Let's do it.
All
Hey,
right.
let's book it, because I know Daniel, my co-host, is super bummed that I've been building you up with him for like
Sure. Well, he can
weeks.
watch this and get some inspiration, maybe.
Cool. And
And
he's great too, because I represent the woo-woo side of this, and my inclination is to go
right,
hard into the fantasy side, and he's a
keep you
has
grounded, right?
yeah, he's got a master's in history, and spent time in Europe, and he's
Good.
he's a smart cookie. So, well, Cort, I can't thank you enough. Do you want to plug anything?
Sure.
Um,
You can all check me out on YouTube on the Cort Lindahl channel. I have like 150 videos there about subjects germane to what we've been discussing about geomancy, the Axis Mundi, prime meridians, and how they've been used. And it's funny how a lot of these prime meridians also have stories associated with them, like of the
mhm.
type we're talking about. So that's if you're interested in what we've been talking about, check that out, or you can check out my blog. If you just word search Cort Lindahl blog, a link will pop up to that. So, and I'm always on Facebook if you really want to ask some questions, send me a friend request and I'd be happy to chat with you as much as I can. I have a lot of people contacting me wanting to talk or tell me about alignments,
Yeah, yeah. I
things like
bet I
that.
bet you get
So
alignments
it
from
gets,
every porta potty to
yeah, it gets
yeah.
not too much to handle sometime, but
I will say that between you and Daniel J. Duke, I've always been impressed with how quickly, in the grand scheme of things, you guys got back to a nobody like me, who's just really interested in this stuff, never had any real design on even doing a podcast. I just
you had
love
a good
this stuff.
idea when the first time I talked to you.
Yeah.
about the layout of William and Mary and stuff like that. And it was
Yeah.
a good idea. And I was like, oh, this guy kind of gets it, you know? So
Yeah.
that's better, you know, than a lot of times I'm interviewed by people who don't really have a clue
Yeah.
what I'm talking about. And I have to kind of tell them what's going on more, you know.
Yeah, I like to get right into the juicy stuff, man. You've put out the background on your YouTube channel and everything like that. Like you can go backfill the information if you need to. I love the podcast where like, hey, let's get into, you don't have to get into so much backstory.
You can
That's how I
say the
want
stuff
this to
that's
be.
not in the video, right? That
Yeah.
to explain it, or, you know, I can comment on what you're thinking and vice versa. So yeah, it's a
Yeah.
good,
I mean, I
good
think that's
chat,
how
man. I appreciate
this
it.
stuff moves forward. Yeah, I my reason in really doing this is I've got all this crap, loaded in my head. None of my information is written down. It's all in my head, and the only way that I can continue to remember it is to corner unwitting people and
Make yourself
vomit it out
regurgitate.
at them. Yeah. And so
I
this
understand.
podcast has been great, and really I just want somebody to take, maybe hear one little piece of my thing and go, oh, a learned person to hear it and go, oh yeah, that is cool. And maybe they can, find the
Yeah, it's
missing
always
that
cool to
I'm
see how other
missing.
people take it, you know, what I
Yeah.
do or what I said and what they think about it, or and it feels good that I kind of inspired some people to even
Oh yeah.
look at things like that, you know. But before
Yeah.
I noticed when I first started talking about geomancy and ley lines and stuff, there weren't barely anybody talking about it, and really nobody. This is like 2008. Nobody was using Google Earth to look for things like that.
Yeah.
And I'm not taking total credit for it, but after that, it kind of got more and more till now it's normal. Even on the
Oh
coast
yeah.
of Oak Island, they're talking about alignments and stuff, you
Yeah.
know, that other people came up with. So
Yeah.
it's that feels good to that I helped a little bit. At least people realize that that could be true. That
Oh
there's
yeah.
things hidden in maps and on the ground.
Brother, you're the godfather of Google Earth alignments and real ones. And I just I'll say this and we'll end it. I just appreciate being able to talk to you and it, again, I am a little bit more grounded in the actual history, but again, I love the conspiracy. I love the mystery. And
Yeah,
the
a
whole
lot of it's
national
speculation.
treasure of it all.
You have to speculate after you gather enough
Yeah.
facts, you know,
Yeah.
that you put, you know, hook the links together. I'm not always right, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of it, I think, where I have enough proof that it's almost undeniable, some of
Well,
it.
it's just I'm appreciative that you are have an education in this and you don't poo poo. Um, you get a little you dip your toes into the woo. You know what I mean? And a grounded approach to this secrecy and this weirdness, because it is weird and it's not 100% academic. The people that you're talking about, the histories that you're writing, those people were steeped in symbolism and esotericism
It's
and
things they intentionally wanted to keep secret, and it still
right.
works, you know. So
So you can't just pretend that doesn't exist if you're approaching these
yeah,
subjects, because the people you're talking about didn't ignore this stuff.
yeah,
They were
especially when you're
steeped in
talking
it.
about Sir Francis Dashwood or the Naval Intelligence Service. Of course, they're not going to, you know, leave you
Yeah.
away to find out the absolute
Yeah.
truth. So,
Yeah.
on that note, I guess we'll sign off, bud.
All
So,
right, brother. It was great talking to you. Thank you so
absolutely,
much.
we'll
And
talk
we'll
again.
yes, sir. Have a
Don't
great
worry.
one.
All right, man. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank
Appreciate it.
you.